At a druggy party in Palm Springs at the famous entertainer Bing Crosby's house, the president asked Mimi if she would like to try amyl nitrate, a medication sometimes used recreationally to enhance sex. She said no. She didn't even smoke cigarettes. He took the capsule, popped it, and put it under Mimi's nose anyway. Her heart began pounding so fast she thought she was having a heart attack. She fled in tears. I would have been livid! Hello, how are you? Welcome to my channel. My name is Denise. Today we're going to keep going on in the Ask Not book. We're talking about the Mimi Beardsley story and also the Diana DeVay story. And those were two girls who found themselves involved with JFK. Now, in the comments from last video, I saw, I don't know if it was the same person, but a couple of times I kept seeing the comment, both just in the comments and then in response to other people's comments, that Mimi did not consider herself to be a rape survivor. She did not consider herself to have been adversely influenced by the president's power, and that she looked back on that relationship as a positive experience and something that just brought color to her life. This individual in the comments said that this was expressly seen in interviews that she did and also in the book that she wrote. It seems strange that the author could get it so wrong when this individual had gone forward to say, this was just a thing that happened to me, but I don't look at it as though I was abused in any way, etc., etc. So to that end, I just wanted to read, in the back of this book, there is a section on each individual and where the author received her information, which is actually something that I hadn't even looked at before. And had I looked at that previously, I probably would have provided that information for you at the top of each story. I knew the bibliography and stuff was at the back, and I just sort of thought that was it. And I wasn't going to necessarily comb through all of that information unless something really glaring stood out to me. But I did think it was interesting that she had, cataloged, as you can see in the book, under each name, her source of references. So to that end, I just want to read to you where she says she got her information about Mimi Beardsley. And it isn't from an interview that she did with Mimi herself. So it could be that she completely misrepresented Mimi's words and Mimi's intentions when she described her experiences. And it could be that this author overlaid the entire experience with how she would feel if she had an encounter with the president, which of course would be very bad journalism. And I'm shocked that she could get it quite so wrong, which leads me to believe that she must have had some kind of source that suggested that Mimi didn't think it was the best experience of her whole life. But as far as what she reports to have read in order to write this picture of Mimi, she says Mimi Alfred documented her relationship with JFK in her memoir, Once Upon a Secret, and in numerous print and television interviews. That material forms the basis for her portions of these two chapters. She also appears, though not by name, in Robert Dallack's biography, An Unfinished Life, John F. Kennedy, 1917 to 1963. She's also mentioned by former JFK staffer Barbara Gamarican in her oral history for the John F. K. Presidential Library and Museum dated June 10, 1964. So that's Mimi's portion. And then as far as Diana DeVay goes, the author writes that this is a first-person account for Airmail, titled JFK and the Radcliffe Girls. It also informed much of her parts of these chapters, as did an interview that I conducted with her for this book. DeVay said recent events, notably the Harvey Weinstein verdict and our subsequent re-examination of what constitutes abuse, had caused her to revisit this most consequential relationship through an entirely new lens. So those are her sources. That's where she says she got her information. So we'll just let that be. And to pick up on our story from last time we had talked about Diana DeVay, but we had not gone in as much detail with Diana as we had with Mimi's story. You'll recall from the last episode that Diana DeVay was introduced to the president, or rather he introduced himself to her at an event, at a campaign event. She was actually at this fundraising event with her boyfriend. And he was, she was his plus one, but she wasn't really interested in politics. Well, she got real interested when the president took an interest in her and wanted her to be at all of his events and made sure that she would be there and would send a car to her house to bring her to these fundraisers and these events. And she took a lot of pride in that. Now, it was a slow burn with these two because unlike with the Mimi Beardsley situation, which 4 days in, she'd already been abused, This is something where he would keep her around and, seem to really enjoy her company and would listen to her take on things and listen to what she thought about this political situation or that political situation. And she could never really figure out what exactly she was there for. Did he just need like a younger person's perspective on the world? Did he just like to have a pretty girl on his arm? Like, what was it? But in the last episode, we finally reached a point where things became less murky, and he definitely was into it for the sex as well. He brings her back to his dingy, nasty little apartment, and his line is, "Let's go." And then they go to his bed and, he takes her virginity. So that's where we left off in the Diana DeBase story. Let's pick that story up now. The book says Diana would find herself in the White House too, in due time. But in 1960, as Jack Kennedy ran for president, he became remote to her. It was surreal to see this man who had seduced her in his tiny apartment on TV and magazine covers, photos of him at campaign events with gorgeous actresses. What if he forgot about her? But then he would call, and it was like Diana had been plugged back into the wall socket, her adrenaline soaring and warming her up. "Come see me at the Carlisle," he said one night. It was all so furtive and elegant. This was the stuff of secret romance. Manhattan's Upper East Side, cold martinis, a famous man waiting on the other side of a door for her. The future president of the United States. Could it get any more glamorous? So on that night, dressed up and made up, Diana took the elevator to the 34th floor and knocked on Jack Kennedy's door. He swung it open and hugged her. "Great timing," he said. "There's good news. And that was it. The phone rang and Jack was off to grab it, his mind already elsewhere. On the next vote count, the next endorsement, the next fundraiser. It was on like this all night, and it was the first time Diana had ever seen how distractible Jack was. He was all over the place, one minute paying attention to Diana, the next minute deep in another phone conversation, mouthing, "Sorry," but not being sorry enough to hold all calls. Why had she come here? "Don't make that face at me," Jack said. He had just ended his 4th or 5th call since she'd arrived. "You of all people can understand what a campaign is," he said. Diana of all people? She was a college girl. It seemed like his wife, of all people, could understand what a campaign is. Maybe that was the problem. Jack kept trying to placate her. "We've been together in this from the beginning," he said. And for all Diana's starry-eyed infatuation, that struck her as glib. Jack was just trying to get her into bed. There would be no whining, no dining, no romance. His attention was on other things, more important things. There would only be fast, technical sex with Jack Kennedy, man on the move. I would be so angry. So disappointed, too. Granted, what are you getting into when you show up at a married man's place? Had he wined and dined you, would that have made it better? Maybe would have made it more enjoyable for you, but it would not have made you have less of a moral hangover the next morning. For all their growing knowledge of Jack's faults, neither Mimi nor Diana knew that he could be a real sadist. Humiliation and sex went hand in hand for him. He was at his best during the chase, but once he seduced you, he seemed to think less of you. These humiliations were never sudden. They were subtle at first and easy to explain away, like the way he would joke with Mimi about what she got up to with the other students in her all-girls boarding school. She knew he wanted to hear about furtive couplings and whether she had ever experimented, but no matter how many times she said nothing, he kept bringing it up. Mimi could always brush that stuff off as a president joking with her. Besides, what was she going to do? Pick an argument with him? Who was under more stress than he was? What kind of a woman would demand more of him, especially with his bad back and his multiple ailments and clearly his unhappy marriage? You, Mimi, you should have picked a fight with him. You should have been like, what the heck are you talking about? No, I never was with any girls, and it's a stupid joke, and I've already told you I never was. You sicko. Again, let us recall how young Mimi was. A child. She probably didn't even know what he was talking about, let me tell you, I was so naive at 19. I was so naive. I wouldn't say that I didn't know anything, because I did, but I would not have known how to respond to a grown man asking me what I was doing with other girls at the boarding school. That would have grossed me out. I would have felt like whatever lies I had been able to tell myself, that this was a romantic connection and he saw something in me and he really liked me. When he started talking to me like that, that would have been like the hand across the face, like the slap that woke me up. Because, you're just gross. Oh, okay. I kind of missed out on that when, you took my virginity on your wife's bed. But now I get it. You're just a weirdo. Anyway, these girls would serve more than they knew at the pleasure of the president. So it was that, in 1962, Mimi found herself on a cruise around the Potomac, an after-work treat the president hosted on the Sequoia, his yacht, in the late days of summer. Her presence was always explained away as one of Pierre Salinger's aides in the press office. She wasn't even old enough to vote, but most people went along with it. Most, that is, except one. Mimi wasn't sure of her name, but she looked older. Word was she was the mistress of Senator Smathers. She pulled Mimi aside during cocktails on the upper deck. "You are too young to be here." Mimi was stunned, humiliated. She thought she'd become so sophisticated, keeping such a dangerous secret with Hilan. But this woman had seen right through her. Who else knew? She had to recover quickly. "I have no idea what you're talking about," Mimi said. "You're going to regret it," the woman said. "All of a sudden you'll turn around and you'll be 25 and you won't have a life." Really? Mimi took offense. John F. Kennedy had chosen her. Name one other 19-year-old, she thought, who's sleeping with the President of the United States. Oh, there is Diana. She's 20, but still. Jack Kennedy had decided. He could not live without Diana DeVay. Would she come to Washington? Please? He'd get her a job, a high-status one, at the National Security Council staff. He was the president now. He could make anything happen for her. Maybe she should go. It wasn't as if Jack Kennedy had a complete hold on Diana. She wasn't in danger of becoming subsumed by him, hadn't paused her life or given up her studies or even stopped dating other men. In fact, the other person who knew about the relationship was Diana's current boyfriend, a journalist at Time named Billy Brammer. Well, I don't think much of Billy, that he would know that she was having an affair with the president, and he'd be like, "Okay, well, can I hang out with you still sometimes too when he's not hanging on your other arm?" Come on, Billy, where's your self-respect? Of course, when Billy could bestir himself to ask some good questions, he asked why was she even involved with Jack. And, Diana was beautiful. She was young, educated, wealthy. Her father was a famous economist. Didn't she want more for herself and be the president's plaything? Jack Kennedy did, after all, have quite the reputation among the press and politicos in D.C. "Nothing will come of it," Diana told him, "but he has a hold on me." Well, that's not exactly what I'd want to hear if I were Billy. I'd be like, well, I don't, and then let go of her hand and let her go, do her own thing. What, you want to just be like the person she comes to when she's got like no one and nothing going on, and she's like, "Hey, Billy, president didn't call me tonight. You want to hang out?" Like, I'd just be like, "Girl, go have your president, but I'm moving on." Anyway, Billy didn't seem to have the self-respect to be able to say so. And maybe he felt like being with somebody like Diana, who the president wanted as well, was, I don't know, some kind of weirdo feather in his cap. Who knows? But Diana continued with the relationship again because she said that he had a hold on her. The book says she was hardly the only woman he had a hold on. There was Pamela Turner, Jackie's newly appointed press secretary, Judith Campbell Exner, who had been involved with Frank Sinatra, and Helen Chavatz, first cousin to Jackie's spurned fiancé, John Husted. Is there a pie he does not have his finger in? And then, of course, there was Marilyn Monroe, whose ongoing affair with Jack dated back to 1955. That was supposed to be secret, too. Okay, let's keep going on with this. So the chapter that is in the next part of the book begins with Mimi. She says, Mimi had always planned to keep her relationship with the president secret. Only her first husband, Tony, had known about it. Not her best friends, not a single trusted family member. She built a life, had 2 daughters, divorced Tony, and remarried, found rewarding work as an administrator at the Fifth Avenue Presbyterian Church in Manhattan. Then, decades later, the eminent historian, Robert Dallek, while working on a JFK biography, unsealed an oral history that named Mimi as the president's in-house teenage mistress. Another biographer had reached out to Mimi 1 year before. It was only a matter of time before the front page headline in the New York Daily News, which ran in May 2003. "Fun and games with Mimi in the White House," it read. The headline inside, JFK had a Monica. The headline denigrated both Monica and Mimi as bimbo interns, not young women overwhelmed by the sexual attentions of a United States president. But see, I just wouldn't put Mimi and Monica in the same category whatsoever. Both of them are extremely young, and both of them were preyed on by presidents who should have known better. Absolutely. But Monica, I feel like, and it could just be that I'm coming at this from a position of having heard the story at the time it was happening and subsequently after. And of course, she was always kind of looked at as like this little tramp, And I don't think that that's the right way to categorize people. I don't think that name calling does anybody any good. It certainly doesn't help tell the story of history because there were 2 people involved. Mimi wasn't flashing her thong at JFK. She was a young girl who had been cold called to work in the secretarial pool and who 4 days in was invited on a tour of the White House residence and then was pushed on a bed and taken advantage of. That doesn't ring the same to me as the story of Monica Lewinsky. After the Daily News outed her, she decided the only person to tell her story would be Mimi Alfred. It took no time for her to find a literary agent and to sell her book to a major publishing house. Mimi wasn't going to be anyone's victim. She'd been with JFK during the Cuban Missile Crisis, for God's sake. She was a consequential part of his life. The historical record had Jackie with him the entire time, but in truth, the president had persuaded Jackie and the children to go to her beloved Glen Ora in Virginia. And as soon as the First Lady was gone, Dave Powers had called for Mimi, who arrived at once. She had spent the next 2 days in the White House watching the president go downstairs for lengthy meetings, hiding from a disapproving Bobby Kennedy, and feeling safe, swaddled like a baby in the finest bedsheets, as the president set about saving America's eastern seaboard from nuclear oblivion, a catastrophe really of his own making. Mimi knew she was witnessing history. She also knew she had no business being there. She didn't know that so many of JFK staffers felt the same way. In 2004, Mimi was shocked to find herself described in Sally Bedell Smith's Kennedy biography, Grace and Power, observed crouching in a car as she was ferried to the president. Here was a scene in which JFK's top press aide, Pierre Salinger, and his assistant, Chris Camp, were seeing the top of a little head over the door and thinking there was a little child sitting in the front seat of the car. Well, they weren't completely wrong. So, more people had known about the affair than Mimi had believed or had wanted to believe. It was the beginning of this relationship, of the specialness with which she had always regarded it, getting away from her. I realized now that I suffered 2 humiliations that day, she would later write of that moment. The first was in having to hide in the car. The second was that the people in the press office knew about me, were talking about me behind my back, and were laughing at me. Mimi discovered another bombshell while reading Grace and Power. She hadn't been the only mistress of JFK's who was still in school. Here she learned of Diana DeVay, the beautiful, high-class Radcliffe girl whom JFK also brought to the White House when Jackie wasn't there. Diana and the president had dinners in the residence with Mimi's great pal, or so she thought, Dave Powers. JFK had sex with Diana in the Lincoln bedroom multiple times, another desecration. Not enough that the president took Mimi's virginity on Jackie's bed. He had to defile his wife's favorite room in the White House, a room she compared to a church. What had Jack Kennedy really thought of women? The adult Mimi learned that the president said that the, quote, chase is more fun than the kill, and that he called his paramours kiddo or sweetie, because there were so many of them he couldn't even remember their names. That aside from Jackie, whose intelligence was a political asset, JFK couldn't abide women who were as smart or smarter than he was. In choosing Mimi and Diana, 2 well-bred girls from the right schools and social class, JFK had gifted them with extraordinary access to power while treating them like sexual marionettes. Although, it seems like if he wasn't interested in smart girls, why would he choose 2 girls who'd gone to the right schools? Diana wasn't an idiot. And Mimi, I'm not calling her an idiot either. I just think that she seemed younger, and the book doesn't really describe them as having any intellectual conversations. It seems like she was always just kind of hanging out on his bed waiting for him to come back. Whereas Diana, for a lengthy time before they had ever begun sleeping together, did seem like she was of some aid to him in some way by giving him sort of a look into the mind of her generation and her class of people, which would have been a group of people that he was interested in sort of pulling into his sphere. So I don't understand how you can say he didn't want people who were smarter than him or whose intelligence would have disrupted him in any way, but Diana wasn't an idiot, so I don't know about that statement. Anyway, back to Diana. Let's hear more about her. Upon graduating from Radcliffe, Diana had moved to D.C. to be closer to Jack, then still a senator but now on the verge of becoming president. He still had never kissed her. What? How are you sleeping with this person and he's got this hold on you, but he cannot deign to kiss you? Okay. He never told her that he loved her. He preferred to imply to let his young girlfriends fill in the blanks. You know how I feel about you, he would say. And that was okay. Diana could rationalize this because he showed her in other ways. You know how I feel about you. What a classic line. A politician through and through. He led her on so smoothly. I'm so attracted to you, Jack would say. You're smart. You have a spark. None of his displays of affection were more significant than his invitation to his and Jackie's Georgetown home, celebrating his inauguration as the 35th President of the United States. Of course, Diana went. How could she miss this? It was history and glamour and power, but it was also the illicit thrill of knowing that the most powerful man in the world wanted her there. When she arrived, he was cold. "So," he said to Diana, "are you any relation to the Swiss banker I met this summer?" Diana's father wasn't a banker, he was an economist. Jack Kennedy hadn't ever asked her what her father did. It hadn't occurred to him that someone with such an unusual last name who moved in the same circles was probably related. "Of course," Diana said. "He's my father." Jack blanched. This was something. Emery DeVay was a Harvard overseer, a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, and someone whom Jack had consulted. It took a lot to rattle Jack Kennedy. Diana was no longer an exciting secret. She was a liability now, and she knew it. She felt rivulets of sweat pouring beneath her dress. Her bones went liquid. "We'll meet when all of this is over," he said. "You're tired. We all are. We should get you home." It's a real hammer on this party, isn't it? Was this really how it ended? Diana proceeded to go home, get drunk, throw up, and wake the next day. And the next. And the next. Waiting for Jack Kennedy to call. Now she was left with no illusion that theirs had ever been a relationship of equals. He was the president. She was just out of her teens. And she had been so naive. In that displeasure, she wrote much later, I realized that I was generic. Mine is a distinctive surname, yet it had taken him 6 months to put it together. Diana's greatest fear now was that her father would find out what she had done. Like Mimi, she had no one to turn to, no one to ask. Is what's happening here normal? Even though he's the married president of the United States, should I be treated this way? No, you shouldn't, okay? So let me just tell you right now. Hey, friends, if any of you ever find yourself in a relationship with any person of power, it is not okay for them to treat you like trash just because a lot of people look at them and think they're something special, okay? Anyway, weeks went by and then months, and just as Diana gave up all hope, the president's secretary called. How was Diana doing? Could she come to the White House? The president wanted to see her. Diana felt no anger, no bitterness, only relief. But as she held out hope that she and the president might rekindle their romance, he appeared to have other things in mind. He arranged a job for her as a research assistant at the National Security Council, a job she later learned was payback to his national security advisor, McGeorge Bundy, who had wanted the pretty but inexperienced Radcliffe girl gone, but who would now have to see more of her than ever. Diana felt, as never before, that her relationship with the president had an expiration date, and that date was nearing. Was he thinking, she wrote later, about his own daughter, small then, but future prey for men just as charming as he was? Probably not. Why would he? Why would suddenly he start thinking about Caroline? No, he would never have let that thought interfere with his choices. Why would he do that? He's having way too good a time. What's he going to sit back and ponder about, wonder if somebody else is going to treat Caroline like this one day? No. That would be the thought that he would have pushed away time and time again had it ever bobbed to the surface. Had Diana known about Mimi, she might have felt jealous. But Mimi's physical proximity to the president hadn't made her any more emotionally secure. Quite the opposite, in fact. Things were moving fast now that JFK was in the swing of things at the White House, and Mimi was struggling to make sense of it all. There were the invitations to travel when the president did, increasingly with a degree of separateness. Mimi was finding herself on a downward trajectory, stashed in a cheap motel and told never to leave, not for anything, until she was summoned to the president's 5-star hotel or family estate. See, that's really what everything would have bothered me about this scenario, but I have to stay at a cheap motel where you're staying at a 5-star hotel and then I'm just dragged up whenever. Like, if I'd ever been able to tell myself that I wasn't just a simple prostitute, I would have now realized that I was. Like, I can't even be allowed to stay in a nice place. You're going to put me over here. I mean, the whole thing would have been completely wrong, completely sordid, and I would have been, knotted up with anxiety every moment of my life that I was involved in this. But then that I would, be sitting in my dingy little stinking room, waiting like a prisoner for a phone call that would, let me be released for a little bit. I just think the veneer would have come off real quick at that point. She called it the waiting game. Mimi could feel the disdain among the president's closest aides, but she didn't care. She was more worried about pleasing the most powerful man in the world and keeping his friends and family and the American public from learning about their relationship. It never occurred to her to ask herself, why was she the target of other staffers' contempt? Why didn't they blame the president, whose newborn son Patrick had lived less than 2 days? Why didn't they give him hell for traveling around with a teenage intern when he should have been at home comforting Jackie? It was all too confusing for Mimi, who felt that the president had come to rely on her emotionally. After Patrick died, while Jackie was still in the hospital recovering from her emergency C-section and double-unit blood transfusion and the trauma of never having held her baby, he invited Mimi up to the private residence and onto the portico, where he read condolence letters aloud and cried. What are you doing with the teenager at this moment of crisis? What comfort would a child have to give you? Like, I can't even imagine being like, now this is the time when I'm going to call up this young nobody that I've been hanging around with, and in my deepest moments of sadness, want to share this with her. Like, had he become so accustomed to numbing pain with sex that the first thing he did was to call up this young girl who had been that for him, feeling that just her presence would be some sort of aid against the depression that was going to come roaring in? Like, did he feel that he needed somebody right then so that, in case the sadness became overwhelming, he could just quickly, do her so that he wouldn't have to think about it anymore, that it would just be like this numbing agent. All the pills Dr. Feelgood is prescribing isn't quite hitting it. Let me get Mimi up in here. Maybe Mimi can help me with the anxiety. I don't know, because for me, I just can't imagine being like, I feel really bad right now. Let me go marinate in some of the folly that I've been involved with. That'll make me feel better. It just feels like I'd want to slough off like the things that I knew had been wrong so that in this moment of heartache, I could just not also compound the grief with feeling guilty and anxious because I've got this teenager sitting right here with me. Like, it just seems like I wouldn't want to mix bad feelings. But maybe he had just plowed so far deep into this weird, crazy, wacky world where you just sleep with the teenagers that he didn't even feel guilt or shame about that anymore. Anyway, there he is, crying, reading the letters. Mimi's over there being like, she's got absolutely no emotional resources to help and aid this man. She's 19 years old. What is she going to offer in this moment? But there Mimi sits, and this may have been the most profound violation of his marriage to Jackie, but Mimi couldn't see it as anything but confirmation of her importance to the president, which is exactly what you would think when you're 19 years old. If you even thought about Jackie, it would be as in the sense of, I must be even more significant than she is. Because he wants me here when he's really sad. Like, he could go sit with his wife and they could grieve together, but he chose not to. He wants me here. And if I were her, even as wrong as this thought would be, I would be flattered by the fact that he had called me. I would, because I would have felt like this was absolute confirmation. All the times I've been worried that he didn't really care about me, how could I even ask that question now? Because he called me. He wants me here. It was she to whom he had turned for comfort. She whom he trusted with his tears. What was this if not intimacy? The president never even used protection with Mimi. Was this part of his recklessness? Or was this his way of tempting fate? He was the most famous Catholic in the world. If Mimi got pregnant with their child, well, he must have considered that possibility, right? He would have to take care of them. Maybe he would leave Jackie someday. Maybe not, but whatever happened with his marriage, getting Mimi pregnant would mean that she would always be in his life. Was that what he wanted? No, that's not what he wants. He just doesn't want to use contraception because it gets in the way. That's why he's not using it. And he probably did enjoy tempting fate. It probably increased the risk factor for him, and that's what made it exciting. It did not mean that he was looking for a secret, clandestine, backdoor way to keep you in his life always, forever, and eternity. There were more trips, and his cruelty grew exponentially. The president now seemed to get off on degrading Mimi in front of other men. You guys. Okay. This really, if I wasn't already annoyed at this guy, this is really where I was like, girl, kick him in the teeth and move on. Grab whatever shreds of self-respect and decency you have left and get out while you can. Okay, well, at a druggy party in Palm Springs at the famous entertainer Bing Crosby's house, the president asked Mimi if she would like to try amyl nitrate, a medication sometimes used recreationally to enhance sex. She said no. She didn't even smoke cigarettes. He took the capsule, popped it, and put it under Mimi's nose anyway. Her heart began pounding so fast she thought she was having a heart attack. She fled in tears. I would have been livid! I just told you I didn't want to do it. And then you popped the capsule and put it under my nose anyway? What are you doing? What are you doing? If everything else wasn't a violation, the fact that I literally just said no, the one time she was able to come up with some boundaries, the one time she said no, he's like, whatever, pop. And that, I think, would have been the thing that I think that's what made her cry, is that there had been probably plenty of times when she'd wanted to say no, when she'd wanted to say, well, actually, I don't want to do this, or this makes me feel uncomfortable. And when she finally was able to say, no, actually, I don't want to. I don't even smoke cigarettes. I don't want to do any drugs. He's like, I don't care. And it would have made you realize that all those other times when you didn't really want it, but you had convinced yourself that you'd be okay with it, you realize he would have taken advantage of you anyway, that you were never actually giving any kind of consent that made it okay. All those times when you told yourself, yeah, but I consented, but secretly in your heart, you're like, but I really didn't want to. Now you know that you were never ever giving consent because he wasn't going to take it anyway. Just like in this instance, you know, you didn't want to do the drugs and he's like, well, we're going to. The president did not go after her. He did not check on her. He spent the night in a private room on the other side of the estate with a guest Mimi did not know was there. Marilyn Monroe. It was Dave Powers who sat with Mimi for an hour, calming her down, assuring her that she would be fine. And she was. Mimi still felt great affection for Dave. He had become something of a father figure to Mimi, stuck in a scene so fast that she was losing herself. In order to survive, she had to deny the worst of it, just compartmentalize and move on. It was a coping mechanism required of anyone close to Jack Kennedy, from his own wife to his most trusted staff to his other women. That had never been clearer than that afternoon in the White House pool in the late summer. Oh, you guys. Mimi and the president splashing around, all very childlike and fun, till the president's mood suddenly darkened. I know it darkens all right. Darkens to the pits of hell. Mr. Powers looks a little tense, the president whispered to Mimi. Would you take care of it? Dave, this guy that she in the twisted nature of this whole thing, she's come to look as this father figure, this person who sort of ferries her through this really crooked and weird maze called the Kennedy administration. Dave Powers is the one who would sit and comfort her, who would pick her up, who would make sure she was okay, who would take her to where she needed to go. This person who sort of ferried her through all of this. And now the president is directing her attention to Dave and being like, Dave looks like he's a little tense. You want to help Dave out with that? No, I don't want to help Dave out with that. Okay, well, Mimi's shocked. I'm shocked. But what if she didn't do as JFK asked? I don't know. What? Is this guy going to fall in? What's going to happen? You're going to get fired to be the best day of your life. Tempt fate, Mimi. Don't do it. Just see what'll happen. Just see what'll happen. Well, she's worried the president's going to think she's a prude, so we can't have that. He could have any woman he wanted. She needed to keep him. But why? What about it? It's just the power. Is anything else in this relationship worth it? And I'm not being mean about Mimi. You guys, you know I've said time and time again that 19-year-old me would have been flattered by the attention of a powerful older man. I would have. I know some people in the comments are like, I would never. I have a moral compass. And you know what? I grew up with a moral compass too, and yet I'm clear-headed enough to know that at 19 years old, I can remember that if a man of power had given me a second look, I'm sure I would have been intrigued. I don't know if it would have ever gotten this far. I believe it would not have. But I can't lie to you and tell you that I wouldn't have at least been like, I don't know what to do. But I would have known what to do here. I would have known what to do here. This guy has used and abused you low these many years. He's forced you to take these drugs when you didn't want to take these drugs. He's kept you in these nasty little apartments. He's clearly desecrated the thoughts of his wife by doing you on her bed. And now he wants you to go over and help Dave. At a certain point, you like to think that Mimi was like, I'm out. I don't need to be shown the door. I will find it on my own. Well, Dave is no longer any father figure because seated poolside in his suit with his feet in the water, he laughed as Mimi made her way to him. And he stood up and, she of course performs what was required of her. The president watched avidly, never saying a word. I am speechless. I am without speech. What? The president's over there watching her? And Dave Powers really disappoints me in this scene. Not that I had a whole lot of respect for Dave, but I liked to believe that Dave was better than this. And that, this person who had sat by Mimi and made sure that she was okay wasn't doing that because he was secretly hoping that the president was then going to send Mimi his way. That he was comforting her because he cared about her as a human being, not because he was secretly, kind of into this young girl in their midst and was, pretty down for the idea of Mimi, coming his way. Because you have to believe that the president probably had talked to Dave before about this and been like, yeah, Mimi's great, Mimi will do whatever you ask her to, watch. I bet you I can get Mimi to come over. And I bet they were having some nasty little conversation. This, I bet, was no surprise to Dave. Now, of course, that is just me adding my own color to the story. Nothing in the story suggests that the president had told Dave anything like that. But it's not hard to imagine that these two disgusting men, one who's procuring the girls and the other one who's enjoying the girls, wouldn't at one point go, hey, you want to taste a little bit of what I've had? I mean, it stands to reason that probably happened. When it was over, Mimi was ashamed. Poor thing. Poor thing. It was a pathetic, sordid scene, she wrote much later. Dave Powers had 2 teenage daughters of his own. Much as I try, she wrote, I cannot bring back anything, any emotion or thought from that episode that would begin to explain why, without hesitation, I obeyed the president's command. I was deeply embarrassed afterward. My heart goes out to her so much. Because although I said earlier, it's like, come on, Mimi, get out of this, get out of this, get out of this. When you're this far in, what is one more weird episode? What's one more thing? And especially if you were a girl, I don't know what her moral background was. I don't know, if she had been raised to believe that, sex was for marriage or anything like that. But she was a child of the 60s. So but had been raised in the 50s. So you would think potentially that she would have had maybe a different moral compass than, say, maybe the girls who in the late 60s, 70s, and you have to wonder if at this point she thought she was just so much soiled goods. Like, well, I've already lost my virginity. I mean, what else? Like, and I've already done these favors for the president. I mean, what is it really if I do it for his friend? Like, is that going to reverse? Is that going to make it so much worse, everything I've already done? I might as well, And so you would have made in a second, 1,000,000 calculations to make it okay morally why you were doing something that so went against your moral code. And I'm not even if she did not have, or even if she wasn't raised with a lot of moral sort of already prepackaged for her, even if she wasn't already given all the answers for the situations, like some of us had parents that let us know what we might come up against in the world and how we would deal with that, even if she wasn't raised with all that. It's built into our humanity to know when we're being degraded and to buck against that. So even if she hadn't thought, oh, I know what I'll do if some man tells me to go give his friend a blowjob, I'll know exactly what to. Nobody had probably prepackaged that experience for her and told her what she should do, but she would have known in her heart that this was a repudiation of her humanity and her decency and her worth, Anyway, my heart goes out to her. My heart goes out to her so much because the shame you would have felt, and you would have put it all on you, and you would have thought, why didn't I do something? And yes, you do have to ask yourself, why didn't I do something? But now you can't do anything about what other people are going to ask you to do, okay? And I am not giving JFK a pass. What I'm saying is, we're all going to find ourselves in situations where we can, after it's over, be like, yeah, but why did they? Well, okay, but you'll never be able to figure out or answer the question or change what they did. But why did I agree to that? She had no idea that this wasn't personal or unique to her. She had no idea how utterly lacking in boundaries the Kennedys were, that the president frequently enjoyed group sex, that he and his brothers and father considered it normal to sleep with the same woman and pass them around. And even if she had, she still wouldn't have been able to leave his orbit. It was too intoxicating. It's too rarefied. There was the weekend trip to Boston, Mimi flying on an Air Force support plane to join the president in his suite at the Sheraton Plaza. Proof that she remained important. Only to find his brother Teddy. Not Teddy! Then a brand new senator sitting there looking far less stylish and cool than the president and absorbing all Jack's insults. Mimi, the president said by way of introduction, why didn't you take care of my baby brother? He could stand a little relaxation. Not this again, and not with Ted. Well, Mimi bestirred herself. Mimi, surprising herself, said no. Oh, Lord, thank you. Truly, thank you. Thank you on Mimi's behalf, because I'm so proud of her. I'm so proud of her for saying no. Now, granted, might not have been as hard to say no to Teddy, but still, she said it. She still couldn't bring herself to leave the room. She couldn't bring herself to leave the president. She didn't yet realize that Dave Powers wasn't so much her friend or ally as her handler, that JFK always used others to dispense with unpleasant things or inconvenient people. And people most often meant women. And so it was that Mimi, during one of the president's phone calls to her dorm, told him she was late and might be pregnant. He's calling her at her dorm? Wasn't he ever worried that anyone was going to listen in that phone call? She didn't know what to do. She knew nothing about birth control or when her most fertile time of the month was. There was no such thing as at-home pregnancy tests yet. The president responded as if Mimi told him that it might rain later. Oh, okay. Well, I've heard this story before. As soon as they got off the phone, Dave Powers called. He gave Mimi the number of a woman who knew an abortion provider in Newark, New Jersey, one of the poorest cities in the United States. They usually are in some of the poorest places in the United States. I mean, all you have to do is look at a map of Planned Parenthood and find out that they're always in the poor places. And that's where Mimi was to go to get this problem solved. It didn't occur to Mimi that Dave had probably done this many times before. Mimi was panicking. She didn't even know if she wanted an abortion. And yet, here was another secret. There was no one she could go to for consolation or counsel, and when she got her period a few days later, she resolved never to mention it to the president or Dave Powers again. Yeah, they're not going to help you. They're going to help you end the life of that child. They're going to try to clean this mess up so nobody knows, but they're not going to help you. On May 13th, 2003, when Mimi's relationship with JFK was revealed, she reached out to Diana, whose relationship with JFK had ended much as Mimi's had, the president pulling away without either young woman fully grasping what was going on. Starstruck at such tender ages, both had done their best to move on. Mimi was a young Army reservist, Diana by relocating to Paris alone. When John Kennedy lost interest in me, Diana wrote years later, now a renowned New York City psychotherapist in her 80s, I also lost interest in me. Inexperienced in adult relationships, it didn't occur to me that women could be angry with men. So instead, I turned on myself. Paralysis, confusion, and ever more waiting ensued. But I think, there's another reason why you would spend time being angry with yourself. Because you feel angry. But if you go to this person who has used and abused you, they're not going to care. They're not going to care that you're angry. They're going to dismiss you. It's not even going to hit them. It's going to be like bullets hitting bulletproof glass. They don't care. Whatever. Be on your way. And if you can't find your way to the door, I will get somebody to carry you out the door. And it's not going to hurt them. Your anger is never going to hurt them. Your anger can affect you. And you need something to change. So if you spend time being angry with yourself, as destructive as that can be, you spend time being angry telling yourself, I'm never going to do that again. I'm never going to let somebody treat me like that again. I'm so stupid for letting that happen. What kind of an idiot would let this happen? Hoping to shame yourself into never finding yourself in a situation like this again. Because at least that anger can be productive. Anger at this other person who doesn't care will never produce anything. Anger at yourself can maybe produce change. So it makes sense why she would turn on herself. She was, she wrote, mired in shame. Mimi got engaged to her Army reservist after a few months of dating. She realized years later that she'd been trying to pull a ripcord to parachute her way out of D.C. in the president's realm without getting hurt and worse than she already had been. She'd done her best to ignore the president's other women. Diana was savvier. As he had become less and less available to her, she heard that JFK was also sleeping with Helen Chavatz, a member of Jackie Kennedy's circle, and Mary Meyer, sister-in-law of JFK's close friend Ben Bradley, now editor-in-chief of the Washington Post. She believed it all. Jack Kennedy, she realized, wasn't in love with Diana DeVay. He probably never had been. She was a convenience, a source of narcissistic supply. By overwhelming majority, John Kennedy sails to victory. When Diana's father died after a serious illness in February 1962, the president called. It wasn't Diana he asked to speak to, but her stepmother, and in that moment she knew. She had to get out. She was helped by her boss, Mark Raskin, who approached Diana one day. She sat at her desk, drowned in paperwork and reports. Why are you doing this shit? He asked her. Did he know? He must have. You don't like this, he told her. You're bored. Do something else. JFK's National Security Advisor Bundy had come to feel protective of Diana since she'd moved to the National Security Council and now summoned her to his office. He thought it was the healthy thing for her to leave, too, but his approach was gentler. Now, Diana, he said, what are you going to do? The word flew out of her mouth, Paris, and off she went to find herself. Soon she was living in a tiny flat, still sometimes waiting for the president to call. Mimi wasn't as strong. She had agreed to another secret trip with the president, this one to Dallas in November 1963. But then Mimi was informed that her presence on this campaign stop would no longer be necessary. Weeks before, the president had begun easing Mimi out of his life, though at the time she hadn't realized that. He had given her several gifts, including 2 diamond and gold pens and an autographed photo of himself captaining his boat. To Mimi, he inscribed, with warmest regards and deep appreciation. Only you and I, he told her, know what that really means. I hate it so much. I hate that I know that at 19 years old, so many girls would not see that as the insult that it is, being this kept secret. And would think, yes, only you and I actually know what that means. You know, you'd be like flattered at having this secret with him. Diana DeVay was alone on November 22nd, 1963, having dinner in a Paris bistro when the TV over the bar switched to breaking news. It took her a moment to grasp what was happening. There was no one for her in Paris. This may have been the loneliest moment of her life. You ask me now what I felt, and I wonder still, she wrote later. To say I had no feelings at all was not because I'd hardened my heart, but because I could not comprehend. I'd grown up in a world where bad things did not happen to important people. I lingered for some time and then walked through the city alone until I found my apartment where I remained all night, numb and alone. It certainly was the most traumatic event of Mimi's young life. That night, while watching the wall-to-wall news coverage and seeing Dave Powers deplane with the president's casket, she burst into tears. Decades later, when Mimi told her story in her best-selling memoir, her goal wasn't to sully the president, but rather to reclaim a significant historic part of her life. It hung around like unfinished business, Mimi said in 2012. I tried to be honest and faithful to that 19-year-old as I remembered her. Now looking back, I can see it's not a good place for a 19-year-old to be, in a relationship that's so imbalanced with such a powerful person, and with an older man, and at the beck and call. I see how sad it was. 9 years after Mimi's book, Diana published her own account, a personal essay that went viral. Her relationship with the president in no way resembled a love affair, she realized now. She was but one of so many young women, a conveyor belt of young women, who were there to sexually service John F. Kennedy, aided and abetted by other powerful men, who kept a cone of silence. Her secret, Diana said, had always been a heavy weight. She called it the pocket of dead energy that she'd forever carried. She was ready, finally, to drop it. What happens when the star strides on, Diana wrote. Useless, futile, ridiculous rage aimed at his disappearing back? A rapid ride down the escalator of self-hatred? All of the above. Back then I thought my job was to become pleasing, an enabling acolyte to a master of the universe. And I know now that my job was to become myself. And that is the end of that. But to that I say, dear friends, if we think in life that we just have to be true to ourselves and that at the end of the day, that'll, be enough, that's exactly how she found herself in this situation. Years later, she would redefine it as, I was trying to please him, but I wasn't trying to please myself. But at the time, she thought she was pleasing herself. She thought that the best way to be herself was to go into this relationship with him. Otherwise, you wouldn't have done it. And we all find ourselves in situations in which we are given a choice. Either I go down this path or I go down this path. But most often we're choosing the one that we think in the end is going to give us the most benefit. Who among us would choose the path that we think is going to hurt us? We don't do that, but we do have different navigating factors as to how we find success. And at that time in her life, she thought that the best way to find success was to stay with a person who she knew was keeping her as an affair partner. That her age and wisdom led her to understand how to define herself differently as years went on. But if our sole aim in life is, I just need to become myself, I just have to be more true to myself, that's not a moral compass. It's not, because at whatever stage of life you are, depending on how much wisdom you have and how much insight you have into yourself and how willing you are to be honest with yourself, you're going to define being true to yourself in a variety of different ways. What is my only hope in life and death? It is that I am not my own, but belong body and soul to my Savior, Jesus Christ. Christ went to the cross, but that was not his ultimate punishment. The ultimate punishment was being separated from his heavenly Father. My punishment was to be separated. But he took that on himself and now stands in my place. And the joy of that is I belong to Jesus Christ, my Savior. So that's where I find my hope and peace, because I belong to somebody who would do that for me. I don't have to meander through life trying to figure out, but I want to be true to myself and what feels right and good right now. When I was younger, I did this, but I'm not going to do that anymore. Now I'm going to do this. But then when I get older, that's going to seem stupid. My only hope in life and death is that I belong to Jesus Christ. And he will direct my paths. The greatest wisdom in the Bible is to lean not on my own understanding, but in all my ways acknowledge him, and he will direct my paths. Because that is why 19-year-old me would have found myself in all kinds of wonky situations. Because there was a part of me that thought, but I'll worry about letting him direct my paths when I'm older. And that's why younger me was so taken in by any attention from a boy. Because I needed them to tell me what my worth was. I had no idea what my worth was. It didn't really hit me all that strong that I was made in the image of God. I mean, that sounded really awesome. And I was really, really glad that the Lord loved me. That was a comforting thought. But I did not understand my worth, my dignity, the delight that God finds in his creation. I did not understand that if somebody was treating me like so much trash to just be used, that was not a compliment to me. Because it did not hit me in any special way that I had been made in God's image and should be treated in a different way. That there was dignity that I deserved because of who I was and whose image I've been created in. And every single one of us have that same dignity that is assigned to us. But we're all going to find ourselves in the Mimi Beardsley situations or the Diana DeVay situations at varying levels. If we don't know who we are or what our worth is or where our hope lies. Because we'll always be casting about looking for what's going to make me feel something. How am I going to feel alive? What's going to make it okay? Because that's all they were doing. They were just trying to feel alive. Trying to feel important. They were trying to feel special. And we're going to find ourselves in so many pits as long as we're casting about in this world to provide us with something that says, you matter, you have worth. Because we actually already matter. We have worth. But if we don't understand who God is, we're not really going to care that he has bestowed worth and dignity on us. Who cares? What does that even mean? And so we're going to be casting around looking. If you want to know how to treat yourself with dignity and respect and find yourself not in those situations, go find out who you belong to. Go find out who God is. Go find out why his love for you and his delight in you matters. And you're sitting in his love and in his presence. If you're like that, if you sit with him and you find out who he is and why he values you, all this trash and tawdry foolishness that some guy's going to offer you, it hits so badly. Like, you see it for what it is. You see the manipulation. You see the foolishness of the requests. You see the brokenness of it. But when you're with your Heavenly Father, when you're sitting with Jesus Christ, who came and took on all the punishment to protect you from having to experience it, how is that being's opinion of you not valid? I saw so much of my young self in Mimi. And no president ever approached me, and nobody powerful ever approached me, but I know who I would have been if they had at that time. And I can guarantee you I would have found myself pushing moral boundaries, because I would have thought that made me special, that person's approval of me was something. And I would have done all kinds of things I had no interest in actually doing, but it's because I needed to be affirmed, because I didn't know very well the being who had affirmed me already. All right. Thank you so much for listening. I so appreciate your time, and we will talk later this week. We're talking about Marilyn Monroe next, so don't miss that one. All right. Talk to you guys later. Bye.